Okay, I'll grab this handheld. Technical difficulties, among other things. All right, good morning. I am going to do my best to stay right here. Chapter 10, chapter 11 is where we began discussing last week. And when you get there, as always, let's go ahead and pause and go to our Father in prayer. As we consider our prayers, we do need to keep our brother Tim Carney in our prayers. I spoke with Melissa this morning, and he had a stroke last night, and it seems more serious than the last stroke he had. So I think she would be welcoming to phone calls and visits. I do not have that room number yet, but as soon as I have the room number, I'll let you know. But usually, if you go in and ask the hospital, they'll let you know what room it is. At Harton. Yes, sir. So just keep him and those who are sick. We know that there are many among us who are unable to be with us here today because they are unwell. One of my daughters is sick, Raylan, so just I know that Brady's little girl's sick. So let's keep them in our prayers as well. If you would, bow with me. Father, we are grateful that despite what's going on in the wide world around us, that you are a faithful God, that you provide in ways that we cannot foresee, that you are constantly walking with us, constantly giving us guidance and spiritual strength. Help us to look to you and to be open to your work in our life. God, we know that there are many who are unwell this morning. We especially remember Tim and Melissa, as there are a lot of uncertainties about what's ahead for Tim. But God, you are mighty. God, we know you care about us and you bring us what's best. And we don't always have clarity on what that is. We know that you do. But God, we come to you in faith asking for what we feel like is best, trusting that you are going to do what you do. And we do bring him before you, asking that you will bring him healing in the days ahead, that you bring skill and quality care by those who are providing his medical needs. And Father, that you be with Melissa and help her not to lose heart in this season. God, for those who are sick, whether it's children or others in our families, it's very difficult to go through sickness at this season when we all want to be together. And so I just pray that for families who are going through that this morning, that you give them encouragement and that you help their family members to get better soon. For those who are mourning during this season, this is a time of intense feeling in the face of loss. And I pray that you give comfort to those who are experiencing those feelings this morning. God, we thank you for gathering us here, that we can study from your word, that we can glean the movements of your way among your people and learn from both the joys as well as the downfalls, that we can take heart from these messages, these lessons from your word, and be changed by them. And God, even when we get to difficult portions of Scripture like we're going to encounter this morning, we know that you are going to guide us to a positive understanding and growth in you. And we just pray for that as we get into our study. In your name we pray. So Gideon was the faithful, Moses-like leader of Israel. When the people looked at Gideon to don him the king, he said, "It's not my right, nor my children, nor my grandchildren, nor anyone's right to be king over Israel except for one." And who was that? God himself. But Gideon's son, Abimelech, did not quite follow after his father and set forth an entire ripple effect of negative consequences for God's people that were continuing all the way until the time in which we're looking this morning. So this morning we're going to look at Jephthah, and we see that the judges preceding Jephthah were essentially there to bring some level of security, and you see that there was even abundance during those times. But now we get to Jephthah, and we see that it's not God who comes to visit him to invite him into being a judge. It's the people who are now looking about themselves and saying, what are we going to do about these threats? What are we going to do about this danger that seeking to undermine the very survival of our people? I mean, this was a very real and deep sense of anxiety. You know, we get anxious every election cycle. We get anxious when there's global conflict. And rightfully so. We're human. You know, we have uncertainties. I think the biggest thing that always looms before us is what's going to happen next. And we have a intricate way of framing narratives in our minds that spell out disaster on all sides. Right? I mean, very often the thing is much greater in our minds than it is in reality, even when it's the worst, right? There are terrible things. There are terrors that have happened in history and happen in the world right now. And yet it seems that the terror in our mind is much more imposing because you don't know what to do with that. Well, this was the point at which Israel was. The sons of Ammon were camping out. They were imposing upon them. And at the end of chapter 10, verse 18, the people, the leaders of Gilead, said to one another, "Who is the man who will begin to fight against the sons of Ammon? He shall become head over all the inhabitants of Gilead." So they're looking at these imminent threats, and they say, who among us can lead us into the unknown, can help us to defend ourselves against these threats that surround us? Now, if you recall, this is part 2 of last week's class, because I began by asking about making vows. Right? If you've ever made a vow, and I think all of us here have made a vow at some point, and not A-E-I-O-U nil. But we made a vow, whether it was to a spouse, whether it was to the Lord. We've all made those promises that we would conduct ourselves or accomplish something or set out to do and live in a relationship with. And we see throughout this story that we're going to be looking at today that there's this underlying theme that expresses itself in the climax of the story, which we will get to, where you have a very faithless people. That God's people, as we have seen, have continually put aside the covenant that they have made to the Lord. They made a vow to the Lord as an entire nation into perpetuity. And yet, time and time again, they failed to uphold that vow. Jephthah is now the 9th judge. He comes in, and we have no account of him being approached like we did Gideon, like we did some of the other judges where God approaches them and calls them into it. But most certainly, it's a part of God's providence working out that Jephthah will be the judge. And God does work through Jephthah. But Jephthah is a picture of where Israel has come from where we began in chapter 1 to where we are now, from where they have come and where they are going. So Jephthah, let's look at chapter 11. Jephthah the Gileadite was a valiant warrior, but he was the son of a harlot, and Gilead was the father of Jephthah. Gilead's wife bore him sons, and when his wife's sons grew up, they drove Jephthah out and said to him, "You shall not have an inheritance in our father's house, for you are the son of another woman." So Jephthah fled from his brothers and lived in the land of Tob, and worthless fellows gathered themselves about Jephthah, and they went out with him. It came about after a while that the sons of Ammon fought against Israel. And when the sons of Ammon fought against Israel, the elders of Gilead went to get Jephthah from the land of Tob. And they said to Jephthah, "Come out and be our chief, that we may fight against the sons of Ammon." Then Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, "Did you not hate me and drive me from my father's house? So why would you come to me now when you were in trouble?" The elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, "For this reason we have now returned to you, that you may go with us and fight with the sons of Ammon, and become head over all the inhabitants of Gilead." So Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, "If you take me back to fight against the sons of Ammon, and the Lord gives them up to me, will I become your head?" The elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, "The Lord is witness between us, surely we will do as you have said." Then Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head and chief over them. And Jephthah spoke all his words before the Lord at Mizpah. All right, so here's our introduction to Jephthah. What are your thoughts about the beginning of his story as a judge? What are some things you see, and what are some things that are missing maybe from other judges? I've already talked about one, but what do you think about this opening?
I think it recognizes the fact if we're successful and the Lord gives them up,
Yeah.
he's already given the success, the fact that the Lord's going to intervene.
Okay. So in some sense, even though the Lord hasn't come directly to him, I mean, we see he is a man of faith. Yeah. Okay.
Which is unusual considering he lives.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Oh, Neil, I think you got it. Thank you. I'll use the lapel. Thank you. All right, is everybody hear me okay? All right, good. Now I don't just have to stand right here. What else? What else do we see about the story as we have opening about Jephthah? What's something that stood out to you? Mars. Okay. So Jephthah definitely is saying, look, God is able to win these victories. If God's with us, we will win. But he's not just all sold out for God, is he? I mean, he's definitely saying, okay, hey, you all kicked me out. You turned your back on me, and now in your moment of crisis, you're coming in and groveling at my feet because me and my marauding band of misfits have went out and probably created some carnage in the region, sometimes I'll see on the back of a big pickup truck in town, locally hated. Have you ever seen that? It's probably the way it was with Jephthah until they had a need, right? He was locally hated until now we need someone who's a warrior, and he's proven himself. He had a reputation. But he's not saying, hey, this is not a Joseph. Right?
I'm just thinking it's kind of similar to him. He was sold by his brother.
Yeah.
And they had to go back to him later.
Yeah, that's right. But there's a big difference, right?
They didn't know they were going to receive.
They didn't know. That's true. They didn't know. But when Joseph, he said, what you meant for evil, like he pointed all of it back to God's providence and God's goodness, right? What you meant for evil, God meant for good. Jephthah, on the other hand, is like, yeah, you kicked me out. Now you're coming back. What's in it for me?
Yeah.
Are you going to make me the head of your community if I do this? And what's the problem with that? I mean, we have established that those who rescue, in those days, the political system as it was, the rescuer became the ruler. So, in a sense, he's right. If I come and do this rescuing work, I have the right to be ruler. I just want to make sure you're going to uphold your end of the deal. So in one sense, that's the case. But in another sense, there doesn't seem that he is doing this solely so that the conquest of Canaan is fulfilled based on covenant terms. Right? That's not what he's trying to do. All right, so we have Jephthah who decides to step in. He's going to go in and work with the people to try to conquer the Ammonites. All right, so what's the issue here? What is it that Ammon is doing? What is it that why are they putting pressure on Israel? Well, there's a conflict here. There's a conflict because the Ammonites feel like they have a claim on the land that Israel's occupying. I mean, we see this today, don't we? Yeah, this back and forth between, based on where the border lies and which one's the proper border, and there's just this conflict. Well, it's not new. This has been going on for a long time. So, I mean, you can look at the dates here. I mean, Jephthah's rule is around, they think, 1078, 1072 BC. So we're saying that this type of conflict around these borders has been going on for thousands of years. So the Ammonites feel like they have this claim on the land. So there's these messages that are sent back and forth. Jephthah sends messengers again to the kings of the son of Ammon, and they say to him, verse 15, thus says Jephthah. This is a proper way, a diplomatic introduction when you're approaching these conversations. Thus says Jephthah, Israel did not take away the land of Moab, nor the land of the sons of Ammon. For when they came up from Egypt, and Israel went through the wilderness to the Red Sea and came to Kadesh. Then Israel sent messengers to the king of Edom, saying, please let us pass through your land. The king of Edom would not listen. And they also sent to the king of Moab, but he would not consent. So Israel remained at Kadesh. Then they went through the wilderness and around the land of Edom and the land of Moab, and came to the east side of the land of Moab, and they camped beyond the Arnon, but they did not enter the territory of Moab, for the Arnon was the border of Moab. And Israel sent messengers. So they're just the Amorites. So what? They sent messengers to Sihon, the king of the Amorites, the king of Heshbon, and Israel said to him, please let us pass through your land. He didn't trust Israel. He didn't want to let them do this. There's a battle that ensued. Israel won, and God gave that land to them. So the conflict here, this is the issue. The Ammonites are putting intense pressure on the Israelites because they say, this is our land and it has been so since the beginning. Well, it's really interesting because for a people who seem to have neglected and forgotten much of the law, they still remember their claim and what happened there. It's not that they don't read the law. It's that they're still living among Canaanites and the Philistines and others whose gods and goddesses are just so attractive. So all of this happens, if you want the reference, all this happens back in Numbers chapter 21. We see that this whole series of events takes place, but it's not the Ammonites who own the land. Who is it? The Amorites. I know that sounds similar to us, but there are different people groups. So the king of the Ammonites is trying to pull a falsehood to remove the people from their rightful lands. Okay, that's what's taking place. This is the conflict. So they have this back and forth, and we see that the king of the sons of Ammon disregarded the messages which Jephthah sent them. So what's going to happen? If diplomatic resolutions and peace talks fail, what often takes place? War. Okay? So they're going to war. This is why they had Jephthah to begin with. They said, look, we've tried all this. It's not working. They're putting pressure on us. Maybe you can appeal to them. Maybe if we have a little might behind our diplomacy, then, you will persuade them. Didn't work. So now they're going to go to war. And here's where we begin to get to the vow and why it's so critical and the problems that happens. This whole narrative, this whole story of Jephthah is kind of based around 5 narratives. You have Israel and the Lord who are talking to one another in chapter 10. You have the elders in Jephthah in 11:5 through 11. You have Jephthah and the Ammonite king that we just looked at part of. But now we're getting to this vow. Look at verse 29. If someone could just read verse 29 for us.
And the Spirit of Jehovah came upon Jephthah, and he passed over Gilead and Manasseh, and passed over Mizpah of Gilead, and from Mizpah of Gilead he passed over unto the children of Ammon.
Okay. There's a key phrase there. When you're studying Scripture, you want to look for those words. I like to tell people, look for those words that are charged with meaning. When you see these words, you're like, okay, there's something happening there. This is important. I need to take note. What's the phrase that's charged with meaning here in this verse? The Spirit of the Lord came upon him, right? Came upon Jephthah. We've heard that before. What does that usually mean? Now, we definitely have an understanding that's more inward and profound than they had at that time because we're Christians. And the Spirit manifests and is poured out in a very, over all who believe in our day. This is prior to that, but the Spirit of the Lord is operating. So we see the third person of the Trinity, as we call him. What is he doing? Like when we hear the Spirit of the Lord is poured upon or comes upon someone, what does that mean? I heard somebody say something. Okay, enabling. Thank you. Did you say empowering? Yeah. It's about to get real. Right? Right?
He's saying that God is going to guide him.
Okay.
And he is going to enable him.
That's right. When the Spirit of the Lord is there, victory is assured. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is peace. Right? Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is power. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is victory. So the Spirit of the Lord coming upon Jephthah means God's going to win this battle. Now, there's some question in my mind here, and maybe you guys and ladies maybe have some insight here, but I don't know if Jephthah realized that the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. I don't know if you can tell that from the text. We have that insight because we're outside looking in. We're reading it. We have the narrator telling us the Spirit of the Lord is there. I don't know if Jephthah knew that because of his actions that come next.
What do you suppose Jephthah knew of the Lord? Because if we go back to verse 9, he made this comment, when he's asking this question, if you'll take me back to fight against the sons of Ammon, and the Lord gives them up to me. So here we have, I think we could just call him a shady character.
Yeah.
Because earlier in the chapter, he surrounds himself with shady foes.
That's right.
So what does he know about the Lord?
Yeah, I think at this point, what we could tell is he knows that he's powerful. We know that he's aware that God, obviously because he knows their history in telling this, in this debate and discussion with the Ammonite king, he knows that God has won victories for Israel in the past. That's all that I am aware that he knows at this point.
So does what he know about the Lord, what he knows about the Lord, does that determine how he understands how the Lord is working? I don't know
absolutely.
if he's in a place where he can understand. he can see the might, he can see the
Yeah.
victory over battles, he can see the power. But what does that mean to me when the Spirit of the Lord comes upon me? He's
Yeah.
not able.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think in what we're about to look at, I think we'll see that he certainly doesn't have an accurate picture of the theology of God, right? He doesn't have an accurate picture of who God is. Yeah. Yeah, he knows some things that are true about the Lord, but there's kind of this question out here, I think we're given this insight here to say, okay, God is definitely working through him. God's still working out his end of covenant faithfulness, his relational faithfulness to his people. Despite whatever Jephthah and the others are doing, God's still faithful. God's still doing what God has promised he would do. Because if you recall, in fact, God is showing mercy in these actions because when they, in that first narrative, right, in chapter 10, when they approach the Lord and they say, God help us, as they had done over and over and over again, how did God respond? Does anyone remember what he says? You figure it out yourself. Right? I mean, essentially, that's what God tells them. Because they had over and over and over and over and over turned their back on God. And then when they get in this little mess, then they cry out to God, and God comes and rescues them, and then they return back to the same old lifestyle. And what God tells them is like, all these gods and goddesses you're looking at around you, look to them for your rescue. If they're so great and they're so good to you, look to them. But what we see here is God. This is like when Adam and Eve sin, and God says, on the day that you do this, surely you will what? And spiritual death absolutely occurred on that moment. But did they physically die that day? Why did they not die? Was God telling something that was untrue? No. Well, what was going on there? God was being merciful. So here you have God telling them, you want the other gods to rescue you, go to them. And at the same time, God has these covenant promises that he's made with his people that he's not going to break. And so with Jephthah, whatever Jephthah's motives and however Jephthah's going about this, God is empowering him for victory. Now, look at verse 30. Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, if you will indeed give the sons of Ammon into my hand, then it shall be that whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the sons of Ammon, it shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering. What do you think of his vow? It's stupid. Yeah. Why would he make a vow like this? Right? The writer tells us the Spirit of the Lord is upon him. Victory is assured. Jephthah doesn't have to do anything other than just walk into the battle, and God's going to work out the details. So why does Jephthah make the vow? Yes, there's stupidity, absolutely. But I think it gets back to what Gary was saying. What you believe about God and what you believe about the Bible is going to affect everything you say, think, and do in your life. Everything. If you say there is no God, that's going to shape everything you do in your life. What you think you're doing, what your goals are in life, purpose or no purpose. If you say there is a God, but this God is not involved in the world. This God wound the clock, set it into motion, step back, and just let it play out. It's going to affect how you live in the world, right? Whatever view you have of God, or even if you believe there is no God, it's going to affect everything you do. I think that's the only way that we can understand Jephthah's actions here. How did he get to this place to begin with? By negotiations, right? By leverage. If I can utilize my leverage, I can become ruler over this people. I would be their leader. Instead of being the outcast, now I'm the one that everybody has to come to for a decision. Well, now you get into this situation that Jephthah realizes is insurmountable. God's already there. God's already active. God's already going to win the victory. But Jephthah instead makes this foolish vow. Now, it's interesting because in chapter 11, verse 27, as Al mentioned, Al, you mentioned about that he seems to have some level of trust in the Lord. If you look back in verse 27, it says, I therefore have not sinned against you, talking about to the king of Ammon. But you are doing me wrong by making war against me. May the Lord the judge today between the sons of Israel and the sons of Ammon. It seems like Jephthah has a vibrant, powerful trust in the Lord. That was before the conversation devolved. Now, war is imminent. And what's he doing? God, if you'll do this. So what does the vow here show about his faith? What do you think the vow shows about his faith?
Matthew?
Yes, sir.
I think here's a man that is upbringing before he was ousted out by his brother.
Mm.
He knew God. He was taught about God. And then exiled and became a man of valor.
Mm-hmm.
Well known. You know, think about what valor means. And then you come back and say, okay, we need a mighty man of valor to
Right.
lead us. So that humbles these men.
Yeah.
And yet, I look at this, and he didn't forget about God, but even as a mighty man of valor, his God was in his presence. And so, as he's in these discussions, God, he's looking at God and saying, I need you to walk with me through this.
Yeah.
And the idea I see here is that he's committing himself, saying, God, if you'll commit yourself 100% in guiding me and helping me accomplish this task, I will give you my all. Meaning, we think that's a rash vow, but the first thing that comes out of my house is yours. You know, I'm as dedicated to you as I want you to be.
Yeah.
That's what I'm.
So there certainly is that. And I think you're right about in terms of Jephthah's vow is certainly from a place of where he recognizes that the Lord is mighty, that he wants to be faithful to the Lord. He wants the Lord to be on his side. And this is how, in his life, people get on his side. It's through leverage.
He's not holding anything back. He said, I will give, basically, what people think is important, I give to you.
Sure. Yes. What people think is important, I'll give to you. But who are the people of which they are among? Pagans. And what do they give to their gods as their all? Their children. And so when you see this, it's very possible because the way that the ancient Israelite, they've done excavations, and the way these ancient Israelite homes are constructed, they certainly had in the lower levels a place where they kept animals indoors. It's very possible he thought, you know what, when I come home every day, the goats run out the door. So you know what, when I get home from this victory, there's going to be a goat that runs out, and I'm going to sacrifice it to the Lord because they're my pride and joy. You know, I love my goats. Maybe that's what he's thinking. But it's really interesting because he says in verse 31, there's a detail there that I think it's hard to get past. And I know the bell rang, but if you'll allow me just one more moment. Then it shall be that whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the sons of Ammon, it shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering. He had the opportunity to say, whatever animal comes out of my house, I will sacrifice it to you, Lord. He doesn't do that. And in fact, animals often don't come out, the meaning there in meat is like a greeting. Animals usually don't come out to greet, people do. It very well could be that it's an animal. I don't think he cares one way or the other. I think whatever comes out of the doors, that's going to be whatever I'm going to devote to the Lord, because that's what people do. That's what you do to show your ultimate devotion. And I think it gets back to Gary's point is he did love the Lord. He did have a trust in the Lord at some level. He was dedicated to the Lord, but his understanding of the Lord was not what God had established in the law. Exactly. Because you have generation after generation after generation who have been living among these people who have been there as a snare for them on every direction they turn. And so, unfortunately, we will talk about, that's the climax. We'll talk about that next Sunday and talk about how this prepares us for what is to come and kind of cap the rest of the book next week. I guess if I'll make any application as we close, we need to make sure that we're not worshiping a false concept of God, but that we're worshiping the true God as he really is. Because concepts create idols that demand much from us. But God is the only one who can give true freedom. You're dismissed. But you're right. I mean, there are certain areas there